Rafael Vásquez, and I am one of the co-authors of our book.
So my name is Will Perez, and I'm also co-author of the book, Culturally Responsive Schooling for Mexican Students. And we also have a Spanish language version of the show, which Rafael can show you. Rafa, why don't you share a little bit about kind of why we decided to do this project?
Well, we've both lived and worked with indigenous communities in the Los Angeles area for a couple of decades now, and so part of this work I think comes from my experience as an indigenous person, but also the collective experience of indigenous students in sort of my environment in schools and community context. One of the things that I think there are different points of departure of how I sort of came to this awareness of indigenous identity and what that means. One of them was, being at home, speaking with family at the kitchen table, but then, hearing something that wasn't quite Spanish, but I knew was in English. And so that was something that later came into sort of my young adult life and into bringing a sort of a critical consciousness and seeing how schools don't really address the experiences of indigenous youth, but how that, for me and for others, friends and community members, were relevant into how sort of who we are and sort of what we bring to the table and the value that it has. So for me, I think that was an issue for school context, is that the curriculum didn't reflect that, and so we often asked ourselves, where do we fit in this narrative in schooling?
And another important reason that we wanted to do this book, particularly on youth, is because we acknowledge that there is a good number of studies on indigenous immigrant communities here in the United States, immigrants from Mexico, from Guatemala, but most of those studies up until the time that we published this book have focused on adult populations, and they focused on sort of labor issues, on health access issues, but very few focused on youth or access to school or a culturally responsive schooling experience for trilingual students that spoke up to 3 languages. Some of them were bilingual, some of them were trilingual, and there was a connection there with their schooling experience in a way that schools failed to recognize that cultural richness. And so we wanted to fill an important gap in the literature in regarding to this population, that youth and access to schooling is of equal importance as the work that's been done that's focused on labor and health access.
Can you tell us a little bit about the different student populations that are highlighted in the book?
Yeah, so we intentionally wanted to show the diversity of experience of indigenous immigrants from Mexico in the United States. We didn't want people to walk away with the sense that this is a monolithic group. There are many indigenous languages spoken in Mexico today, and we wanted to highlight that diversity of experience. And so we decided to focus on 3 groups, on Mixtecos, Zapotecos, and Purépechas. And in particular, we also wanted to show that their experiences vary by the context where the schools are situated, whether they're in urban areas or whether they're in rural areas or whether they're in suburban areas. And so all of these 3 groups are situated in the 3 different types of environments, which you can see throughout the book, and you can see sort of how that factors into the recognition or the lack of support for the youth in schools. And so, Rafa, I wonder if you could say a little bit about why we were dedicated to publishing the book in English and Spanish.
Una de las razones que pensamos en hacer el libro, la traducción en español, es por la urgencia y la necesidad de las experiencias que no solo los jóvenes enfrentan en las escuelas en los Estados Unidos, pero también en México. Si pensamos en el legado de más de 500 años en México, la colonización, etcétera, cómo eso juega un papel en la sociedad, en particular en las escuelas. Y hasta hoy sabemos que muchas veces hay actos de violencia contra estos jóvenes. Puede ser violencia física, pero también violencia social, emocional, que los queda marcados, que los queda con heridas abiertas que nunca han sanado. Entonces la urgencia viene por esa raíz que viene de México. Entonces creemos que es urgente y es necesario, particularmente también porque no vemos en México un estudio sobre las experiencias juveniles. El enfoque es usualmente entre los niños, como debe de ser, pero también tenemos que expandir estos conocimientos para que podamos atender estas inequidades en México con urgencia.
Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the things that I particularly want to highlight about the book is that, you know, we didn't want to just, you know, share these stories of resilience, you know, of sort of these cultural and linguistic assets that the youth bring to schools, but that go unrecognized, and if anything, they are discriminated against, you know, whenever they display sort of, you know, parts of their cultural identity or speak their indigenous language. What we also do in the book is we include a variety of photographs. So here's an example of a picture of several community events that we participated during the collection of the data for this, you know, for this study. And so you get to see also kind of a visual examples of, you know, kind of what you know, the efforts that the community takes here in the United States to continue those traditions, despite, you know, the continued societal marginalization, including marginalization that happens within Latinx communities. You know, these are, you know, there is discrimination that happens against these youth and these communities within, you know, immigrant enclaves that originate from Mexico, and that's something that we also touch on in the book. And so you get a visual sense as well as sort of our analysis of what this means in terms of what educators need to do to support students from these communities.
How do you think maybe teachers could benefit from the book as a resource?
Yeah, so, you know, in chapter 5 we precisely, you know, sort of compile, you know, what we learned from the literature about effective strategies for being culturally responsive with, you know, Indigenous Mexican students, and finding space from our work. And so I wonder, perhaps you want to share some examples that we came across that you found that were particularly, you know, exemplary in the ways that we need to do on a larger scale.
Yeah, definitely. I think there are some school sites where we were at. One of them in the Los Angeles area, I think, that you know, that it's highlighted in part in the book, is about sort of creating school spaces where students can sort of be seen and feel validated. There are many ways to do that. So sometimes there's like student clubs, student organizations, where the students themselves get to explore parts of the identity, do fundraisers around traditional aspects of their community. There's also counselors or student teachers that have also been influential in supporting these students by encouraging them to learn their language, and oftentimes the teachers themselves is a practice that they've gone to the communities of origin in Mexico to sort of bring back sort of that knowledge, and still to bring that sort of enrich the students' curriculum through that. And so some of that you'll see here in the book through some of the stories and how sort of students sort of navigate being in the U.S. but also going back to Mexico, and how they sort of bring those aspects of their culture into, again, the curriculum, to make sense of their experiences in schools, and to sort of also as a springboard for their academic success.
So that, in a nutshell, is a brief summary of our book, published by Multilingual Matters, both in English and in Spanish. So check it out. Thanks for listening.